So I'm Dan Trajano. I am a family doctor and a population health specialist. I do consulting work with healthcare systems and healthcare policy. And I am increasingly concerned about that intersection between climate change, climate pollution, and human health. And that's one of the reasons I spend a lot of time volunteering with MN 350 South Metro, and why this issue of electric school buses and getting rid of those harmful diesel buses is so important, because it sits right at that intersection of climate change, climate pollution, and climate health. So we're going to take you through some of the research on the health and the academic and climate benefits of electrifying our school bus fleet. Lindsay Port, unfortunately, contacted us today. She was excited about attending, but there is a lot of stuff going on in the state right now, including omnibus bill negotiations and the recent shootings that have occurred in Brooklyn Center that they are meeting with right now. So she sends her regrets, but we do have a legislative update for you. And Grant Stevenson, one of the leaders of MN 350, who leads the MN 350 policy action team, and also has been our mentor down here in MN 350 South Metro, and helping us do organizing work down here, is going to give that legislative update. And the time is right now, because there is a lot of legislation pointed at supporting schools and supporting school districts to electrify their school bus fleets. And then after that, Marianne Vandebussy, one of our co-founders here of MN 350 South Metro, is going to tell you what we have done to date to try to help support and engage with our school boards. And when she talks to you, you're going to understand why we need your help, because we've had some challenges in trying to support our school boards on this issue. And we will need a lot of extra help. After that, we're going to spend some time together in smaller groups, and we'll do some breakout session, which I love that part of Zoom, where we can break out in groups of 3. And 2 of our newest leaders of MN 350 South Metro, David Hahn and Jennifer Hugstedva, are going to lead us through those small group exercise and a discussion afterwards, and hopefully generating ideas from all of us on what we can do to encourage and advocate for electric school buses. And then finally, Paula will come back and talk to you about some simple next steps that you can actually start today that will have a big impact on this issue down in the South Metro. So thank you for being here. I am going to talk a little bit about some of the research on the health impact of diesel fumes. Surprisingly, there are a couple of great studies out there showing there's definitely academic impact. And obviously, when you're burning diesel fumes, there is a climate impact if we were to transition to electric buses. My colleagues out in Oregon, they have a Physicians for Social Responsibility group out in Oregon, and they've done a nice summary of the various health impacts that diesel emissions cause. And diesel is filled with small particle emissions, PM 2.5, these teeny tiny ultra microscopic particles. And diesel is also known to produce a lot of black carbon, which is particularly harmful to health and to climate, because in science education, you know that black absorbs heat, and that kind of carbon attracts heat and causes greater global warming. But what happens when people breathe in those diesel fumes with those small particles is they are small enough to not only get into the lungs. From the lungs, they can pass right through into the blood and cause all sorts of systemic health problems. And this diagram, I think, highlights many of them. I'm going to talk a little bit about the respiratory problems, because certainly diesel and black carbon are respiratory irritants. And in children who breathe a lot more per their body weight than adults, about 50% more, it is exceedingly impactful on their lungs. And especially the 14% of kids who have asthma. If you talk to any of my emergency room colleagues, they will tell you on bad days with a lot of emissions in the air, you will undoubtedly see many more people coming in the emergency department with asthma attacks. So very bad on lungs. But as those small particles get into the blood, they also affect people's risk for cardiovascular disease, increased risk of stroke and heart attacks. They worsen allergies. They are associated with worsening dementia and Alzheimer's disease. I want to touch a little bit, and when Wendy talks about all those buses idling out there in the school parking lots, that is disturbing, especially when you have parents, bringing their kids into school, or young female teachers who may be pregnant. There is a lot of association with birth anomalies in pregnant women. There's a link to autism and ADHD in those children that are exposed in utero. So really, really bad stuff. I didn't even know that idling, I thought idling became illegal, but apparently it's, I know the MPCA recommends that we do not idle. And we need something to stop that immediately. And then in Oregon, they also calculate, just in Oregon itself, 468 premature deaths are caused from diesel emissions, and $3.5 billion in economic loss due to the health impacts of diesel, just in Oregon itself. Diesel fumes impact school performance. And there are two really well done studies that highlight this. The first one there that looked at test score outcomes was done in Georgia, all across Georgia. 750,000 students were studied. And what they did there, it was like more than 2,600 buses. They actually used the technology and randomized kids to ride in the traditional buses that are literally filled with diesel fumes. If you're riding in a diesel bus, your exposure to diesel emissions is 10 times higher than if you're riding in the car in front of you. They use the technology, they retrofit these diesel buses with something that will help lower the amount of emissions that get into that school bus cab. Mind you, these are not electric buses. They're still diesel buses, and they're still getting some exposure. But the technology was able to decrease that exposure inside those school bus cabs. And what they found with those kids that were randomized to the cleaner buses versus those kids that were in the traditional buses filled with the diesel fumes is that those kids that were in those dirtier buses had significantly lower test scores over a 2-year period of time or so, especially in English, and especially impactful on elementary school children. Another study was quite similar. They used that same technology, they retrofit buses to try to decrease the diesel fumes in them. And they compared those kids to kids riding in those dirtier buses. And what they studied in Michigan was absenteeism. And also they did lung function tests on these kids. And what they found in those diesel fume buses was an 8% higher absentee rate and significantly lower pulmonary function test. And this was especially true in those 14% of kids who have asthma. So it is quite clear that diesel impacts academic performance. And then lastly, we are MN350 and we are a climate majority project. And I really appreciate, Matt's sort of global view of this. And as we all know, that the United States is on a per capita basis, the biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. Diesel buses are a huge emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, which cause global warming. 5.2 million tons of carbon per year from US diesel buses. It's the equivalent of 1 million cars. And if President Biden reaches his goal, and it's quite explicit in his infrastructure plan that his goal is to make sure that US school buses are manufactured in America in 100% zero emission electric buses, all of them by 2030. If we reach that goal and Biden is successful in getting that infrastructure plan passed, we will get rid of all of those buses and we'll have 5.2 million tons of carbon less in the atmosphere every year. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Grant Stevenson to talk more about policy and politics. And Grant is a great friend. He has been a supporter of us here in the South Metro. He is a leader on the MN350 policy action team. He knows policy and politics. So I look forward to Grant giving us an update on the policy and politics of electric school buses.